Star Trek 57, M23, take 2.
It's got Star Trek. Episode 62. The Next Generation, Season 3, Episode 13. Deja Q.
I could have chosen to exist as a Markovian sea lizard, or a Belzoidian flea. Anything I wished, as long as it was mortal. And since I had only a fraction of a second to mull, I chose this, and asked them to bring me here.
Why?
Because in all the universe, you're the closest thing I have to a friend, Jean-Luc.
Sir, he is reading as fully human.
What, is there an echo in here?
I am sensing an emotional presence, Captain. I would normally describe it as being terrified.
How rude.
What is it you want, Q?
Your compassion. All right. Sanctuary on this ship. Dreary as it may sound to the both of us.
Return that moon to its orbit.
I have no powers! Cue the ordinary!
Q the liar. Q the misanthrope.
Cue the miserable, cue the desperate. What must I do to convince you people?
Die.
Oh, very clever, Worf. Eat any good books lately?
When you're touching a cat, you're touching feces.
There's feces all over. Everyone's like, they're so clean.
But it
When
clean.
you put your hands in your pockets, you're touching feet.
But then they clean themselves. Yeah, you know what? That's true.
That's true.
you know what?
True, dude.
You know what?
But the cat.
You can't.
You're talking about like putting your face on feces, and then if you touch a cat,
Yeah,
you're
you
touching...
take your face and you put your face on the feces.
So the cat cleans themselves a lot, but it's just their gross ass mouth cleaning, isn't
They
it?
lick it with the spiky tongue.
Which is isn't cats' mouths worse than dogs? Aren't dogs' mouths actually not that bad?
I don't know.
They're not as bad as cats, yeah.
Yeah, cats are supposed to be
I
gross.
don't know. We can declare that.
They're not as bad as
out,
humans
Go
either.
out and look this up. Do not take medical advice from podcasts.
From doctors.
This is not, it's got medicine. It's got MD, no.
This is meant for an intellectual. This is an intellectual discussion. Dan suggests you don't take advice from doctors. I'm suggesting you don't take advice from podcasts. The two, by the way, those two statements not mutually exclusive. So Dan and I are not technically in disagreement.
Should you listen to Dr. Drew?
No.
Does he still do stuff?
Fuck Dr. Drew. That guy. Fuck Dr. Drew. Anyway, welcome to the It's Got Star Trek podcast. That was we've done our dilly dallying, which is
digressed.
contractual. We apologize to the audience. That is a contractual part of our advertisers insist on it.
We'd stop it if we could. But we can't.
But our advertisers insist on it. All those ads, and we apologize for all the ads that you have to endure while listening to this show. But what are you going to do? They're subtly slipped in. You're probably not even aware of all the product placement that we do during the course of this podcast, primarily for Star Trek.
Yeah, our whole podcast, I guess, is
it's because it's got Star
product
Trek.
placement.
It's got Star Trek. So, what episode number is this, Jesse? You're the keeper of the numbers.
For our podcast, it's episode 62.
That's correct. And we are discussing which episode, Dan?
Season 3, episode 13.
All right.
13.
Okay. We went through this last week. Yes, the information you've provided is indeed sufficient in most cases for people to find the episode. However, our research has determined that people do, in fact, like to have the actual title of the episode.
Dejaku.
Deja Q. Yes. I knew what you were saying, and it still confused me.
Yeah, because I was playing it over in my head. I'm like, I have to say that out loud.
All right. So
great. Whatever I have to say is so great. I'm so lead.
This episode aired in 1990.
1990. Yeah, in fact.
February of 1990.
February, yeah. So the premiere date, Deja Q, premiered on February 5th, 1990. Now, for all the children out there who were born after that period, not only was this television program on television, like on a television, like with, no streaming or none of that.
Commercials.
And we had tube TVs.
You had to watch it when it was on. But because The Next Generation was syndicated, look it up, kids. It was syndicated.
It was on all over the place.
It meant that when the premiere date is February 5th, that's the date it's available for the local affiliates, the local independent stations. They can air it from that point forward. But it was up to them, at least throughout the course of the week, to determine what the time it would air. I honestly am trying to remember when it aired here in the DC area as kids. Next Generation.
I wonder if I guess non-syndicated shows well, they can only be played on that one channel, so there'd be less play.
Well,
but
they were played on network affiliates,
the
but at a
network
specific
affiliate-
time.
So I would imagine you would make more money off of like Jerry Seinfeld. Do you think because it was a it was a syndicated show?
Yeah, but
I could have seen that bit going on with you playing that thing for like another 5 minutes.
But Seinfeld was a network show, but then also was rapidly in syndicated.
See, that's what I
reruns.
was trying to. That's what I was trying to get at. But you knocked me out of the sky.
I apologize.
No, it's okay. It's
But
fine.
Next Generation
I
was
should be more robust.
Was first run syndication, and it's important. I was about to say it's important for people out there to know this, but it's not. None of this matters
so the
anymore.
syndication is why he got so fucking rich.
But there's two forms of syndication. There's first run and second run syndication. First run syndication was essentially pioneered by Star Trek The Next Generation, because when they were shopping it around, the normal process during that time period in the mid 80s was that you wanted a TV show to be on a network. Right? Or possibly a cable network, but even that was more fledgling.
Yeah,
at the
you
time.
always wanted to be on the network.
You wanted to be on a network, but the producers, Paramount, and the producers with Next Generation, I don't know the details, of course. I don't know the full background, but I do know that ultimately they decided, I think, that they could make more money. They're probably correct.
Yeah, because you could just be on like various times all over.
That's what I just said about why Jerry Seinfeld's so fucking rich.
Yeah,
'cause
right.
I was merely pointing out the difference between first run syndication with second run syndication had existed already for a long time, which what we colloquially refer to as reruns, right? But that's second run syndication. It airs on the network, and then a few years later, it gets put into the hopper for the syndicated. They can play it every day, 2 episodes at fucking 7 o'clock or whatever, right? But Next Generation and then Deep Space Nine were first run syndication in that, and a lot of other sci-fi shows followed until the more modern era, when everything started solidifying onto cable networks and cable networks became more of a thing. Then it was being first run, like Battlestar Galactica or The Expanse or whatever. They're on a specific station and they're aired at a specific time.
I would imagine the first run and second run would get comparable plays, except if it like super takes off, and then the second run would probably get more plays.
Honestly, I think that's probably what they realized and why it was pioneering, because they said, why would we just make a contract with one network when we can make 1,000 contracts with all the individual affiliates around the country and around the world, and some of those were going to get more money than others, as opposed to one big contract with a centralized player.
I feel like a lot of shows, I always got this vibe of syndicated shows having this sort of muddier look to them. I don't know why. It's like the networks, they made them bright and crisp. And that I could be making that up entirely.
It could be a bandwidth thing, honestly. There was still, bandwidth was still
it was UHF.
It wasn't digital bandwidth, but it was still a bandwidth thing.
Yeah, it was UHF was like...
Most of that syndication janks was
on the network stuff was basically VHF.
Yeah, you got to get them thick wires.
Plus, maybe you'd get like some weird like Spanish channel or something.
Thick coaxial
and then
wires.
they started having the UHF networks like UPN.
And then there's Weird Al Yankovic's movie UHF,
which is a great movie.
It's a fantastic movie.
That was way before that.
That was before that.
But this was Captain's Log, Stardate 43539.1.
Oh, right on.
Unless we wanted to talk more about syndication.
We'll leave it to the audience. We'll pause here. We'll put it out to the audience, and then you can vote whether you want to learn more about syndication, an obsolete form of media distribution.
Okay. Feedback at It's Got Starch.
Okay, so one of the reasons this episode is pretty cool, it's great in the fact it shows just how much everyone hates Q to the point where they feel like he should just die.
Right.
Even with
just die.
He's not worth it.
Yeah, exactly. Geordi said that. I was like, whoa, Geordi, that's not...
Geordi's a cold motherfucker. So, this is not the only example of that.
Yeah, and so Picard's always talking about how precious life is and stuff. And in the end, Picard was begrudgingly going to save him, and of course did the whole, I want to save the ship. But you knew he couldn't just let Q die on his own. But
even like Dr. Crusher's like, just sort of, she doesn't want to help him, but she's the doctor. That's her job. Like,
and she helps him all roughly.
Yeah,
I'm sure that was
maybe
rougher
you're just hungry, asshole.
So Picard like saved him, but when Q was talking to, like, basically at the final scene where he's talking about suicide to Picard, and Picard was just drinking his tea and he left the room. He just like left the room, and you couldn't tell if Picard like cared or not, or he was like, I should probably force myself to care about the fact that he just mentioned suicide.
There is an indicator, and I did find this actually quite interesting because this episode, just for a couple little background things, this episode was, as we noted, it came out in February 5th of 1990. Of course, it was written and produced a little bit before that. According to the captain's log book, Michael Piller, who is one of the main producers on Star Trek, said that the original idea that they had in the writing room was for Q to actually be faking losing his powers.
Right.
And the whole gimmick was going to be that he was going to he wanted to put himself in a situation to look like a hero.
And there's no evidence that he wasn't doing that. The plot suggests that he wasn't, but
apparently they had this idea, they put it together, and when they had a meeting with Gene Roddenberry and Rick Berman, but Gene Roddenberry said, it's much more interesting if you just kind of do the thing and take the god and take away his powers, right? They're like, do that story. And Roddenberry supposedly, according to Piller, convinced them that was the more interesting story. And I gotta agree. I think it is a more interesting story to actually have the powers taken away. But simultaneously, both the crew and I would suggest the audience themselves are not 100% convinced until pretty much right at the end.
Right.
It could still be a gimmick up till the end.
Right. It was kind of funny in the opening scene before the opening credits, like when Q just appeared, like naked, and all he said was "Red Alert." Like it was all like
"Red Alert."
Like he was being snarky Q, and I was thinking, Q, you just lost all your powers. Why are you being snarky? And the very next scene after the credits, he's having basically a panic attack. You know, so
he still makes a dramatic entrance.
Yeah, he still does.
A fact I read that was interesting was, according to John Delancey, who plays Q, of course, he said that they tried a few different ways to do that scene, but ultimately he just had to be completely naked. It was the only way it worked. They gave him like a G-string at some point or whatever. He didn't go into great detail, but he said, like, look, we tried it multiple different ways, and ultimately the only way it worked to get the shot we needed was for me to be completely fucking naked. Now, there's another story from a completely separate person, a female producer, who was like, yeah, John Delancey just showed up in a robe and took his robe off, and he was fucking naked.
Yeah.
So I don't know which story is true. But long story short, he was completely naked.
That's cool.
When he filmed that.
So was Angela in the first episode of Who's the Boss?
Angela. That works because this is actually the Angela from Who's the Boss.
What?
So you said Angela, I responded. The call and response for anytime you mention the name Angela is somebody has to respond, Angela.
I've never heard that.
You have to have fucking heard that.
Where's that from?
From everything.
Schmangela?
It's from, Schmangela.
Have you heard of this, Jesse?
No.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You guys are nuts.
I don't know what
if somebody says Angela, you got to say Angela.
I'm feeling duped.
But the thing is, that's a reference to Who's the Boss. But it's never prior to this moment have I done the Angela thing and it having to be actually related to Who's the Boss.
Well, I'm glad I can be original for you.
Anyway, I apologize for the interruption. Angela, Who's the Boss?
Tony Danza saw her naked because she was naked and he didn't know it. So it must be fun being an actor seeing your coworkers naked. Except you might get a little. Apparently, Bryan Cranston likes to take off his clothes.
I think there can be some problematic.
Some kind of Me Too shit.
Yeah. Well, I think Chris Pratt got in trouble for that. Like at one point, Chris Pratt got in trouble for being naked for real. He took it down his pants or something, and I think the producers were like, "Dude, you're not allowed to do." Like it's funny, but dude, modern workplace, you can't just like flap your dick out.
Right. That was the assumption, not 10 years prior.
But I also, I frankly, I agree with that in terms of the workplace things, but I also understand how it is with actors. Actors do a lot of that whole getting intimate and, comfortable with your bodies and flapping your penis around.
Yeah.
I'm not approving of that, but I understand that is part of the culture.
Yeah.
Penis culture.
Yeah. It's just, actors, have to get into roles and act them because that's what actors do. That was what I just said. And it really taught somebody something today.
Very good.
So, yeah, I guess the problem is there's some kind of orbit, what did they call it? there's a descending asteroidal moon.
It's got a ferrous crystalline structure.
Yeah, that's why it won't. That's why it's able to.
iron.
That's why it's able to withstand tidal forces when it's falling and doesn't fly apart.
Yeah, it's
And they're at Braille 4.
I don't know that they needed the extra ferrous crystal thing. I think it's sufficient just to be like, there's a fucking moon is about to crash into the planet. That's going to be bad news.
But maybe there was science that indicated that it wouldn't. But I don't know. I doubt that.
What was up with those aliens? They look deformed even for fucking aliens.
Well, it's their mouths. It's because their mouths were all
they
like
give them the
closed.
round mouths.
Their mouths like were webbed. They had webbed mouths.
They like actually made aliens on Star Trek look like weirdo aliens.
We also only see the aliens through the view screen, and I was thinking about how usually you're seeing them in multiple different perspectives, and it is a little awkward when you're only your sole interaction with these people is through the view screen, and you're only seeing them from a certain angle, and they're also all freaking out that their planet's about to get all fucked up.
Yeah, so did they really answer the question of
what caused this?
What caused it? I guess Q said it was the result of basically a large celestial object passing through at near right angles to the plane of the star system. So basically he said probably a black hole or something crazy basically flying through the star system. Now, I mean,
he supposed that.
He supposed that. And so we don't really find out. We don't truly find out why, because it's also weird because, of course, there's the question of why does Q appear with his powers lost at the same time that this shit's going down? Because this shit doesn't seem like it's that common, at least for what the Starfleet would encounter.
The Enterprise seemed, they referred to this as inexplicable. So they seem somewhat flummoxed as to the cause of this. And I agree with you, and I've seen this episode countless times, of course, but it really got me thinking this time, when I was watching it a couple times over, that we don't get a full explanation of that, and there is some implication that the Q continuum was set this scenario up in order to test Q. They don't get anywhere near stating that outright.
Right.
But it certainly seems that the facts fit that theory.
Yeah, I'd buy that.
Right, yeah.
That seems like a good theory to deal with that because
there's no other way to explain like how he just got there with no clothes on.
Yeah, and for such a rare event to happen. Well, I mean, obviously they transported him there. They did transport, but the fact that he arrived just at the time that some kind of rare celestial event was happening.
It's difficult because there's no way to get a definitive answer out of it. Yeah, it is interesting because the whole philosophical question of whether or not to get rid of Q in order to help save these people because of the Calamarain.
Not to be confused with Alamarain.
Calamarain, third shap. I also thought that. So you have
third shap.
You have this situation which they set up very well. And we'll go a little bit more into this, but I think this was an extremely well written episode overall. Mm-hmm. Great dialogue and all that. We'll talk about that in a second. But the structure of this episode is that they hint early on at this idea that you have a God man, a God man who has been stripped of his powers, and he's developed all these enemies, the Enterprise being technically an enemy of a sort, right? An antagonist for sure, Picard and Q. And he has these other antagonists. You can assume they exist out there. There are references. Guinan references it. And there are other little references early on in this episode.
That Guinan part was fun and just kind of...
It was.
It was like 5 minutes, but it was fun.
Well, it's less than that. Yeah. I mean, it's a really... I was going to comment that's a really short scene, but is one of the key memories I have of this episode ever since it aired, was her stabbing into the fork. But we'll get to that in a second. So, like, the idea that he would have these enemies that would come after him... What's great about it is it makes perfect sense. It really makes perfect sense with what we know of the character and just the universe building and all that. And they have this philosophical question floating out there over whether it is right to give up Q to the people who we know want to exact revenge upon him in order to save these other people. The fact, though, is that they don't really have to make that decision because, as you noted, Dan, Q makes the decision for them, basically, because he leaves the ship. They never actually get confronted with that. They talk about that problem.
Picard was trying to transport the ship, but the other Q prevented Picard from doing that.
But it's just that unlike some other... This is not a heavy moralistic episode, but there's a lot of moralistic meat on the bones that you can dig at. And I think that it works very well. As a result, you kind of laughing along, you're enjoying the story. And then underneath it are these questions about the nature of sacrifice, the nature of death. And then this question over what are you utilitarian in your philosophy? Do you you do whatever saves the most people? Or, I mean, what is the argument for saving Q just for shits and giggles? Like, what do you think is the argument for saving Q? Because in this case, it's a numbers issue, right? You can save Q or you can help save this planet, potentially. Then there's the whole other issue, like, all right, forget that. How about the order of events, right? Well, they were trying to save the planet before Q even showed up. So like Q doesn't get primacy in the order of events either. It's an interesting dilemma in terms of how you deal with this.
Well, he showed up right around the same time, and they even thought that he was a part of it.
But
originally.
they had gotten the message and flown all the way to the planet. My point being is, I'm sure like Q came in the middle of all this. So even if you're going to argue who came first gets the attention, it's still the planet, right?
Yeah, it's so there is the whole putting a virus in the Borg cube, to how they wouldn't do that, to commit genocide on the Borg, even though it would probably save more lives in the end. So like Picard was like going with the immediate sort of like save, I guess. And I don't know. That's a good question.
He
Where do you draw that
it's a perfectly
line?
fine shuttlecraft
But
he wanted to get.
Yeah, it was a great shuttlecraft. But I mean, the question is, compare that though to like not genociding the Borg, because that would maybe possibly save more lives if they did that. So
it is, of course, a reference in some ways to the classic philosophical issue, the trolley problem.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, look it up. There are philosophical issues with even the construct of the trolley problem, which some people argue quite convincingly is something that makes the most sense in the context of sort of like a white hegemonic situation. But leaving that aside, it's fun to look that stuff up. But the trolley situation, which is, in short, you've got, a train on a tracks, and you can push a switch, and like there's 5 people on the track if you don't push the switch, but then there's like 1 person on the track if you do. So like if you push the switch, you're effectively killing that 1 person, but it's saving 5 people's lives. It's a common thing. Everyone's heard about it. It's a big thing on The Good Place, for example, if you watch that show. And this is similar in that sense, but they don't parse it down and examine it in the same way that a show like The Good Place or even other episodes of Star Trek do. But there are hints of it there, in that Picard may not want to take an action that will lead to the death of Q or the torture of Q by handing him over to aliens. On the other hand, when he goes of his own volition, Picard still tries to take action to take him back.
Now, the difference between how Picard wouldn't hand him over to the aliens, right? We just established that. But then there was the part where Picard said, just drop him off at the first station. Starbase, and let them deal with it. Now, is that just as an okay thing to do? Like,
passing the buck.
Yeah, it's passing the buck. So, but you're like, I don't care if they screw it up and you get killed. At least it's not my problem. Yeah. Which seems like something that Picard,
it seemed a little bit funny for Picard to just be like, let them deal with it. That's what he said. He was like, let them deal with this.
Right. But by the end of the episode, Picard was his old Picard self. It's like Picard had to go through this quiet mental journey in the episode of like, how am I supposed to want to save this dude's life?
At the very end, he's making that funny face, like, and he's like making that face as he's saying that Q has like some residue of humanity. And he does that thing where his lips puff out. He just doesn't even want to. He's just disgusted that he even has to say that or something.
He even has to contemplate that it's a real thing.
Yeah.
Is that when like Q appears in a cloud of dust and says, "Don't bet on it"? Picard? That was kind of an eerie ending in a way. I was like, "What?"
Oh yeah, it was.
Because like Q says, like, "I owe you my gratitude," which is like, "Oh, cool." So we have some. There's relations have been improved with Q. Cool, that's a good thing. And then Picard had the same realization. He's like, maybe Q's a little human after all. It's like, huh? And then Q just shuts it down. He's like, ha ha, no, ha ha ha, creepy.
Because they were already like, well, like, maybe that's the end of Q. And they're like, okay, well,
they were all like, all right, I guess he's dead.
There's definitely the aspect of if there's nothing they can do, if they tried everything they could and it still didn't work, they'd probably be like, well,
Q.
Yeah. I mean, they wanted to, like, if the same thing happened to the crystalline entity where they tried to save it and it died, would they be bummed out? As opposed to, what actually happened. But Yeah, like crystalline entity was fucked up, and what?
Yeah, I mean it was a genocidal crystal,
right? And so what would happen?
It had Q has a face, I guess.
Q. Yeah, right. That's the deal, right?
I mean, we cannot dismiss though I know the intention, but this whole human-centric thing is part of this.
Well, actually, though, I think I'm saying something different because the crystalline entity, if they were trying to save it and it still died anyways, they might still be bummed by it. Okay, the spoilers for that episode, which is I can't remember the
spoiler alert,
is that what happens is the crystalline entity, they're on the way to save it, and then like the doctor, there was a doctor or something.
Her son had been killed by the crystalline entity.
Right. And so she, at the last minute, she like pumped it through the roof and killed the crystalline entity.
She used some frequency modulation.
So she killed this thing.
To tear that shit apart.
This thing that was just destroying planets, and she killed it, and she was like, "Oh, I did it for my son. He'll love me." And then Data gives this speech. It's just like, your son would be really pissed off right now. And
because he had all, because it was from Omicron Theta where Data was found, and Data had all the son's memories like somehow in his head.
Right, yeah. So the question is I guess at the end of that episode was the question that they were all horrified because of what she did, like, or if the crystalline entity had just died and they tried their best, do you think they'd be the same as they were with Q? It's like, well, I guess that's the end of the crystalline entity. As long as they tried.
Right. I think it's a great question because it brings into this, the whole personal aspect, because a lot of Picard's beef with Q and everybody in the crew to some extent, but Picard in particular, it's like a personal beef he has with Q. He's aggravated personally by Q. He seems to recognize that and try to correct for that. But then in the end, I mean, one thing I think is worth pointing out is first, when Q is talking about suicide and sacrifice and, giving up his life, it's still within the context of him saying, well, my human life is so fucking shitty.
Yeah, there's that too.
I'd rather be dead. So
boring.
Whether he believes that, yeah, one of those great lines, whether he believes it or not, there's still that, at least that projection of selfishness. Now, it could be that Q is faking it or not, who knows? But there's a projection of selfishness. So that's one interesting thing. But conversely, when Picard works to rescue Q, who's on a suicide mission, Picard says that whole thing about like, well, it's a perfectly good shuttlecraft.
Right.
So he's in the opposite situation where he's feeling empathy and sympathy for Q and wants to save him, and he's still trying to cover it up by saying like this half-ass thing that he knows Riker doesn't buy, but he's still going to go through the motions of saying, well, it's a perfectly good shuttlecraft. We wouldn't want to. That's my Picard impression.
By the way, that reminded me of
BTW.
When you brought up Riker, how he was like, Q brought all those hot babes and put them next to Riker, and Riker was like, I'm not like interested in this, basically, and that is so much more progressive than what Trip Tucker and Captain Archer
Charles
did.
Trip Tucker III.
But then again, when they were with the dancers, of course, those dancers did.
That was a whole century or two. Centuries.
Those women though were Orion, and apparently Orion women
are magic,
and even like so. I wonder if Riker would have been taken by those wiles of those hot babes. Those Orion women.
I think a key factor to consider is Riker could also be coming from the position of, I don't need these women.
Yeah, that's kind of
Riker and
Archer and Trip are a little desperate.
They're a little and Reed. Because Trip, remember, Trip was all right. Trip was already hooking up with T'Pol, so he wasn't.
Vulcan action.
Yeah, he was not as affected by those.
That's right.
Tune in to last week's episode for a thorough discussion.
But you have to do it last week.
You can do it anytime.
You should have done it last week.
I disagree with Dan on this point. These are evergreen podcasts. You can tune in, tune out, tune all over, tune all
over the
world. You can tune all over these fucking podcasts. You can tune all over the place.
Tune all over.
It's 2021. Feel free to do what you like.
Jesse, you were mentioning before about how Q is having all these human problems and like people just aren't feeling sorry for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're almost like shaming Q for it. Like they're shaming Q for so what did he was. First was sleepy, yeah, and then Picard is just like, you're tired.
Fell asleep.
You get used to it. It's like, and so Picard was just in a hurry, but then like the hunger one, the Crusher.
Well, he had back issues.
The back pain with Crusher, yeah.
Yeah, she was fucking with them, but she
He's
was
like,
also.
what's the word? Ow.
Yeah, but he was at one point he was saying like, I've got this feeling in my stomach, it hurts, and she's like, you're hungry.
Yeah.
It's like you're impatient. It's like, come on, I know you hate this guy, but separate compartmentalize your shit, because if it was a sweet like little boy, you would say, oh well, the hunger is like, if it was Elliot, Troy's like, what was that? Elliot, Troy's like alien baby.
Right.
Who's talking about?
Who's Troy's alien baby?
Who's Troy?
The alien
Counselor Troy.
Yeah.
It was Elliot. Yeah.
Yeah. So
he had curly hobbit hair.
Yeah. So
Idiot.
so if it was Elliot saying like, my stomach hurts.
The child.
My stomach hurts, and she's like, "Oh, sweetie, that just means you're hungry." And if he was like, "I don't know, I just passed out. I don't know what happened," they wouldn't be like,
We got to get you
sleepy.
10 chocolate sundaes.
They wouldn't be like, you're sleepy, get over it. They would just be like, "Oh, sweetheart, that's called being tired." So they're really having a hard time compartmentalizing their emotions.
You know what's hilarious?
Because it's a logical thing for Q to be all crazy about this.
You know what's hilarious is that I agree with you, but I think that we think that because of how much Star Trek we watched. And so it's a weird feedback loop where we're getting mad at older Star Trek for not conforming to the lessons that Star Trek has subsequently taught us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right? We got so used to like, no, you have to do it exactly this way.
So when after Q and Data, for example, Data like was pulling Q, to prevent him from being pulled away. Data's stronger than those what were those things called? Charlemagne's?
The Calamarain. Third Shap. 1, 2, Calamarain.
They exist as swirls of ionized gas. So Data is stronger than swirls of ionized gas.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I should hope so, yeah.
And so when Data's like pulling on him, right? And then like, Data gets all messed up, and then Data's on the medical table, and then Q is all like sitting there, not really that worried about Data, but instead he's musing over like, I'm mortal and I survived. And he goes, the cheers are overwhelming. And Picard's line of giving him shit was pretty good here, is when he said, you exceed your own standards of self-preoccupation. Which I thought was like a really awesome way to sort of take him down.
This episode is packed full of fantastic lines. I
Yeah.
mean, too many to recount. And TNG in particular has always had good dialogue and good plotting and all that. But I thought that this is a highlight example. This is something you would show to somebody to say, like, look at the snappy dialogue, the snappy, zippy, peppy dialogue that you get in here. I wrote down a couple examples. And again, we can't do justice to the setups and the actors, because these are all just so fantastic, the people who are involved doing all this stuff. But of course, what must I do to convince you people? And then Q says, and then Worf says, die.
Yeah.
Which is great. And then the classic line that everyone remembers from this episode, oh, very clever, Worf. Eat any good books lately?
and then there's, of course, the Picard meme with his head in his hands.
Yeah, the Picard meme comes from this episode.
Yeah, that whole like minute and a half is just so packed full of like awesomeness.
In addition to the line you mentioned, Dan, I also like, please don't feel compelled now to tell me the story of the boy who cried Worf.
Yeah. Yeah, Q's always got something funny to say like that.
This is getting on my nerves now that I have them.
Yeah. They could, you know what? The delivery could like fail in certain circumstances, but he delivers them
John
great.
Delancey has such great timing, and of course, so do the other actors. I mean, at this stage, this is third season of TNG. They've shaken out a lot of the wigglies and the wobblies. The writers, the actors, the characterization has all really coalesced, and that's part of what makes this episode work so well.
There's extra sounds and stuff.
There's like extra bleeps and bloops. But another great line from Data, which is not even funny, it's just profound, where he says, "You have achieved in disgrace what I have always aspired to be."
Yeah, that was really good.
And he says, and I feel nothing. Because he's still not human, so it doesn't disturb him at all. That's just very interesting.
Yeah. Or I am not good in groups. It's difficult to work in a group when you're omnipotent. Which is just, no shit, but it's good to have that vocalized, right?
Data is telling Q about how he needs to like improve his ability to work within groups. He's all talking about groups, and I started just thinking thinking about, like, that's what we hear all the time about how to successfully land a job, is talk about how you're great.
It's also
in
what they
groups.
tell you, like, when you're in college and they're
Yeah.
all like, you're at the writing center or whatever. It's like, group dynamics are very important. And they're not wrong. I'm doing a mocking voice, but
it's
they're
like,
not wrong.
it's kind of like you hear it a lot.
Yeah, you do hear it a lot. I like when he was like, all right, death of a coward, then so be it. But as a human, I would have died of boredom.
Yeah.
You alluded to earlier, Dan. And then, of course, you mentioned the Riker with the babes,
Hot
know,
babes.
the quote unquote hot babes. Where then he switches them to Worf, and Worf seems a little bit more amenable.
Yeah, he does.
having
He still holds it
the
in, but
women there.
he's still like, yeah.
But when Riker is being all
Worf's down to clown.
Worf is, I mean, Riker's all like, I don't need magic babes. I can find normal ladies. And Q says, oh, you're so stolid. You weren't like that before the beard.
Yeah. That's some
And
meta stuff.
that is one of two examples that I found in this episode where Q plays almost a meta role, because Riker grew the beard in the third season, right? But we don't, or earlier than that even. But there's not
second, I think.
second season, yeah. But there's not much mention of it. It's not like somebody says it's rare that somebody's like, oh, you grew a beard,
Right.
But
nobody's like, hey, nice beard.
But Q mentions that here. But the other one that is even more acute is when he's interacting with Beverly, and she shows up, because his back hurts, and he's like, oh, Beverly, I forget the exact line, but it's something along the lines of he's like, oh, Beverly, I see they've shipped you off to isolation or whatever.
Back to exile or something.
Yeah, back to exile. That's what it was, exile. I see they've shipped you back to exile. That's, I think, maybe the only reference to Beverly Crusher returning to the series after being off of it for the second season when they replaced her with Dr. Pulaski.
Because the last time he was on the Enterprise was with Dr. Pulaski, right?
Yes,
they never really talked about what happened.
They don't. It's just season season
shameful.
3 opens up and it's just Pulaski's gone. You don't hear about it, and
They must talk about it eventually.
Beverly's there.
Other than
Everybody's being
Q's
nice to
side
it's not
director.
really mentioned, and Pulaski's just sort of not mentioned again. And
Yeah, good riddance.
well, I know there's a whole big debate. I like both Pulaski and Crusher.
She was in TOS
She's fine.
a couple times, wasn't
Yeah, the actress Diana Muldaur.
that's right,
She played at least one character in TOS. But and there's a whole behind the scenes thing. Apparently, I think they just didn't like Crusher, or maybe she didn't like them, because you got to remember. As much as we love this show and Deep Space Nine and the subsequent ones, there was some weird 80s, 90s misogynistic Rick Berman apparently related.
there was some.
So a lot of the women on the show were dealing with some bullshit.
Well, they just decided they didn't want her. Wasn't that the deal? Was or like she was
I think
just
it was
off the
partly
show.
that.
Maybe they also partly took her character in the wrong direction by having her basically dislike or disregard Data. That was Pulaski's thing, is reminding Data that he's not real or not human.
And I think the other
I think that doesn't. I think the fans. I mean, you might think like, oh, that's an intriguing position.
Yeah.
I love to hate this person, but when you think about Beverly Crusher and then you think about Pulaski all hating on Data, it's kind of hard to take. I don't know.
For me, I think the other thing is I like the episodes with Pulaski. I think that there's plenty of good stuff with the character of Pulaski, Dr. Pulaski, but it seemed to be such an overt attempt to bring back a McCoy style character and have that sort of character floating around in the ship. And first
Kind
of
of
all,
abrasive.
that's obnoxious just when it's so overt. It's like, oh, you're just trying to recreate this character, right? Data works because Data fills a similar niche to Spock, but going in a completely different direction. Spock wanted to hide his humanness. Data wants to be human, for example, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
But they still fill a similar niche in some ways. Pulaski, it was just like, all right, we want an irascible, McCoy-like, no nonsense country style doctor, and that worked great on TOS, the edge of the frontier, the exploratory ship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And TNG with its nice carpets and plush chairs and it did not work as well. So I think the combination of it being an overt attempt at introducing some McCoy style irascibility, combined with the fact that same irascibility sort of didn't fit in this environment they created. Maybe if they'd done it from the start, it would have been different, but it was weird. And I tend to prefer Crusher But part of that, of course, is because of how many wonderful adventures and interactions we had with Crusher over the course of the.
And Crusher
whole
always had
series.
that sort of like mysterious relationship with Picard that over time got sort of not really developed, but sort of revealed.
I'm convinced that Wesley is
Oh,
Picard's
absolutely.
boy. I know they've tried to say no, but
they can't convince
I've never
me.
thought otherwise.
I think Picard sent Crusher's dad, Crusher, on a death mission, and he was just plowing Beverly, and they've been guilty ever since.
They've been guilty?
They've been guilty because he's dead.
They've been feeling
yeah,
guilty.
I see. I feel what you're saying.
She feels guilty for cheating on her husband while he was on a death mission. Picard
That's why
feels
their
guilty.
dynamic's all weird.
Yeah, it's a little awkward. Maybe that's why she left for a year.
Yeah.
So,
But somehow,
universe.
but Wesley got to stay.
speaking more about Q and talking about being human, one of the things he was worried about was going bald. But you look at John Delancey's hair; he's got a lot of hair where he does, but he seems like he's got that arch, that widow's
peak action.
Yeah, but
he's still got a lot of hair, doesn't he?
I feel like he might. I mean, but Steve Carell, did you see him in the first season of Office? His hair was going. So and then his hair came back later, but
his hair doesn't grow.
But so
that's a Larry King joke.
Yeah, we've done
Larry King recently died.
We've done this joke before about Larry King dying.
We lament his. No, did we? No, but he just died.
We never joked on his death.
Well, because he just died in between the last recording.
No, I know. I mean, my joke was I was gonna say. We've talked about this skit with Larry
It's not a
King.
skit.
Well, whatever. Well, it's a skit for the guy calling. He's the guy calling. It's from the perspective of the guy calling.
Okay, you take the perspective of the guy calling. Okay,
the point I'm making.
Larry King gets prank called by a guy. You got to look this shit up. It's
Dude,
great.
I'm saying, and there's nothing wrong with us repeating it. But what I was going to say was, yes, we've talked about this before.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we've talked about this.
Build back better.
Yes, we've talked about like the Larry King, I paint my bald spot thing a few times, and there's nothing wrong with that. But my joke was going to be, I'll switch it up at the last second and say, we joke about Larry King dying all the time. And the joke is that just happened recently.
It did just happen recently.
We wouldn't have been talking about it.
He was
a lot.
very, very, very old.
Yeah.
He was very old.
Yeah.
And his hair
Cloris
grows.
Leachman died.
His hair no longer grows.
So anyway, my point with the John Delancey is I think it is possible he did put hair plants in it. He go bald, who cares?
Hair implants?
Hair plants, they call them.
What do you know?
Plugs.
Okay.
Plugs, whatever. Oh my God, Patrick, come on. It's not that crazy.
No, it's not that it's crazy. It's just that you said hair plants. And then I was just commenting. I was like, implants, right? And then he was like, no.
No.
Plants.
Well, because I was trying to say plugs and I just got the word wrong. So.
And there should be no embarrassment on your part.
There's none.
But that does not remove the hilarity from the situation. Hilarity does not require humiliation.
No, I know that, and I never said it did. I never said I was humiliated. I was just, I guess I just didn't think it was that funny.
My hair grows.
I guess I just didn't think it was
Look
that funny.
up Larry King, my hair grows.
No, there's nothing wrong with the joke. I'm not offended. I just didn't think it was very funny. Thinking about all those people dying, I'm not offended, but I just didn't think it was very funny.
And then look up the time when Larry King's really tired and some guy's asking him about like how to be a good journalist, and he starts talking about what he wants in a young doctor.
Surgeon or something.
These are the things I expect in the young MD.
So my point with John DeLance is at the time it looked like he was having some male pattern baldness in some way, although he might not have been. So I don't know. So when Q talking about going bald, I was thinking like, Q, you're already kind of going bald, but I could be wrong. We can move on.
Last weekend, I went to my mom's house and she was watching a Matlock that had John Delancey in it.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
He was in
Breaking Bad.
He was in Breaking Bad, and he was also in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. I don't know how popular that movie is amongst
Is it
people
about
these
like
days.
people killing babies or something?
No,
he plays a rapist gynecologist.
Okay, it was a bad it's a bad guy movie.
Yeah,
or a bad person movie. About babies.
Yeah, I mean, he's a quote-unquote main character, but he's not like the main character. But
John
anyway.
Delancey.
Yeah, if you want to see Q
cool.
being a molesting gynecologist, look up The Hand That Rocks the Cradle.
Do you think
90s movie?
Do you think they have like an emergency replicator on the bridge, and that's how they got that uniform, that set of clothes out to him so fast? Like,
That's a good question.
Fire up the emergency
in case you
replicator.
lose your uniform on the bridge, they got this uniform replicator. Like,
On the bridge.
it's like in case your clothes fall off on the bridge, and that extra exciting action on.
I don't know. There could have been a whole journey that we just didn't see.
But somebody on Twitter was asking, do they even do laundry, or do they just always like put the clothes in the replicator, break them down, and remake them?
Because that's
Just
what they
make
were doing in
clothes out of
Picard.
poop.
I think Picard, they were just throwing their glasses away and just re-replicating.
And even on Discovery, they were showing, Burnham getting a new uniform. There was like from some replicator drawer.
So there were some there was some. So in terms of writing, I don't know, but like one of them was when LaForge at the beginning, they're trying to figure out like how they're going to get enough power to move this asteroid, and LaForge says, we've done everything by the book and a little extra. So we've established that he's done everything by the book and a little extra. We need more time or more power, and we're short on both. Okay, cool. And then he says, I'll take a look.
He's got plenty of time.
He says, I'll take a look and see if there are any rules I haven't broken. He just said he did everything by the book. So of course there's rules he hasn't broken. You see what I'm saying? Like, you don't say, I've done everything by the book. I'm going to go see what rules I broke.
Yeah,
Like, what
no, I agree.
is he saying that he wants to break more rules, or was he saying that like he thinks he might have accidentally broken some rules?
If he was looking
and
in the
he's
book,
worried?
then he already knows what he hasn't done wrong.
So I don't know. He says we've done everything by the book, maybe, and a little extra. He was just downplaying the fact that he broke all the rules. I don't know. It was a very confusing line. I don't know.
I
Geordi,
think
what a flim-flam, man.
I think Geordi.
I think it's a weird line.
I love Geordi, but I think he might be retroactively, he might be a fairly manipulative person.
See, what he should have said is we've done everything by the book. I'll just see if there's any rules I can break. That's what he should have said. But instead he says, I'll take a look and see if there aren't rules I broke, because I'm repeating what I said before, which is just like, he said he didn't break any rules, but then the little extra, does that mean he broke some rules? I think the writing is weird on that. It's just all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. I think the writing's weird. I don't know if that's a Geordi fault thing. I think it's a...
I also think when you look at, and it's not only in Star Trek that you see this, but I think there's a lot of Star Trek out there, so you see it a lot. Often it's the setup of the scenario where it's a little bit shaky, and I'm not even talking about quote unquote scientifically shaky, because you've got your technobabble. It is sci-fi. It's meant to be fun. You're meant to go with it. But yeah, I do think that sometimes the setups to these plots where they're just like, we just got to get the story going. I mean, it's similar to when we did, Mirror Mirror, when they transport into a mirror universe, they encounter a bunch of Hitler people, and they start to figure out what's going on, and Kirk just goes and sits down and has a little chat with the computer, and both determines what happened and finds a solution to what they need to do, all in the span of about a minute and a half.
The computer should have just told him from the start.
Yeah. And you could quibble with that, but obviously in the context of a story, they're just trying to tell a story. But I think well observed, Dan, that Geordi's lines are somewhat inconsistent, borderline incoherent when you really dig deep into them.
Oh, and then
because that's like a filter that he's trying to communicate stuff to everybody else inside Geordi's brain. He's all like, these motherfuckers want me to do this shit.
So you think it was a choice by the writers to make Geordi say a weird thing?
I like when Geordi was like, it would be like an ant pushing a bicycle.
Yeah, right. And he said
which is a great analogy, but it's also a bizarre analogy.
Yeah, right. And he said, so our odds are slim. How could that even be slim?
It seems like impossible.
When would you ever consider an ant being able to push a tricycle or whatever?
It'd have to be a tricycle that was in proportion to the ant.
He should,
but can't ants do all that many times their body?
Yeah, but only 50 times.
I mean, they're like,
and
they don't weigh that much. Yeah.
So he should
have pretty fucking impressive. But one ant ain't moving a tricycle.
Structure.
I mean, you pick something more realistic. Like it would be. I mean,
It's like a Markovian sea lizard pushing a tricycle.
Yeah, Markovian.
That was one of the things that Q mentioned.
What
that he could have been.
Some kind
that
of
and a Belzodian flea.
Belzodian flea.
He should have said it would be like trying to hold your breath for 15 minutes if you'd never tried it before. Slim. I would believe that. I would believe if you've never tried it before, there's a slim possibility you could do that. But I don't think there's a slim possibility that an ant's going to push a tricycle.
What are you gonna get? You guys. What are you gonna get? Ants?
What to get a good?
What are you gonna against ants? You got some problem with ants?
What are you talking about?
There's so many ants in this world.
There's ants in my pants.
There's oh shit.
What about that guy with the
pause the podcast and
ants
sort
in
that
his
out.
eyes?
Yeah.
Oh, Anson is
Anson My Eyes Johnson.
Yeah.
That was on Rick and Morty.
Yeah.
Jesse, you also brought up how Q learns from Data that Troy likes chocolate, and so he orders 10 of them. Why, if you can replicate food that quickly, why wouldn't you just order one and then gauge what you're gonna do? You can't,
because he's a fucking drama queen.
He listened.
This
He
Q guy.
listened to Data explain food to him, and Data doesn't know what food is. He knows what something. He's like, "Is it good?" Is like, "Well, the best thing is to say that it's good for me," and it was just some kind of lubricant that he eats every now and then.
Yeah, and so Data knew what the deal
I'm
was.
gonna listen to what this guy
I was
says.
watching that. I was watching this episode in the living room, and my wife was pottering around the house doing something. And when Data was all talking about his drinking his slurry of nutrients, she just laughed out loud. She's like, "That's great. He loves lubricating his biofunctions."
Exactly.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. That was pretty cool.
Okay,
but
I'll get 10 Sundays.
I'm kind of fan of
this guy. Likes to lubricate.
I like lubricating my biofunctions too.
And you know what? That it kind of went for a cheap joke, but it proves what you were saying, Patrick, about him being a drama queen. Of course, when it's time to eat him, he's like, "I lost my appetite."
I'm not even hungry.
He was just trying to be a pain in the ass.
And I like how the
okay.
waiters are all like, there's 2 waiters carrying 2 trays.
They each have to carry. Yeah,
You couldn't even eat that much before they melted.
but it's okay because it all gets recycled. So it's not like
Doesn't matter.
They weren't like this asshole. They were just
But
like,
they still
okay,
made-
whatever.
They still had to do shit they didn't need to do. And I
Yeah,
kind
they were
of
like, you want 10? Because she was like 10.
Yeah.
I know it's a different context. I feel if you went into a restaurant by yourself or with one other person who the waiters know is not going to order anything, and you're like, I want 10 of something, 10 of anything, I think the waiter's going to be like, you can go fuck yourself. This is some sort of scam. This is like some sort of practical joke.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to talk people down.
Maybe you
from
could
things.
do 2, but that's a big maybe.
Yeah.
You have to be like Alfred Hitchcock.
Perspicacity incarnate. I like that
Yeah,
line.
yeah, he says a lot of fun words.
Yeah, because perspicacity means that it's like being shrewd or being insightful. So I think he was being sarcastic. I presume he was being sarcastic.
Oh, he yelled at so when he was when he was in the brig, and then Worf, I was confused by that for the longest time. Brig and bridge, when I was really young, I was like, I couldn't understand that they were different. But then eventually I figured it out after enough demonstrations. But
demonstration.
Yeah.
People protesting at the White House, holding up signs saying they are not the same. There's it says bridge and then it says brig, and there's an equal sign with a slash through it.
Yeah, exactly. So when Q is behind bars essentially, and Worf is sitting there, and he's telling Worf to listen to him. He's like, "You listen to me, Worf," blah blah blah. And then Worf walks away and ignores him, and he just yells at him, "Romulan!" It's like, first of all, did you really think he was gonna get him with that? But then
Worf did pause for a second.
He did.
He yells Romulan, and Worf pauses like he's about to kick his ass, and then he's like, "Ah."
But this is another weird line, because after that he goes, "I should have said Romulan, that Klingon goat." But he did say Romulan.
He meant he should have become a Romulan instead of a human. Because that was an extension of the conversation where he was trying to ingratiate himself to Worf, which was funny, where he's like, I shouldn't have been a human. I should have been a Klingon. I'm a Klingon at heart. As a fellow Klingon, are you going to help me out?
Okay.
He was just scamming. This dude's scatting and scamming.
Nobody's going to buy Q as a Klingon.
Okay, so that's pretty clever then.
Yeah, it works, but I agree. Actually, it was on the second watch where it kind of jumped out at me. I was like, oh, okay, I could see a little confusion in that. If you're not following along 100% with what's going on there.
I really like the little scene where they're in the turbo. He's in the turbo lift with Worf, and he's talking, and he's walking around the turbo lift.
Yeah,
and then he finishes saying what he's saying, and he's ends up right where Worf is.
Yeah,
and having to bathe.
Yeah, that was a good one.
That's really good.
Delancey's really good at using up the space that he's in. He does the same thing in the brig. Yeah. And I mean, every scene he's in, basically, and not just in this episode, he's really good at. I presume that comes from a experience as a stage actor. Mm-hmm. I don't know off the top of my head, but
that would make sense.
You get the impression, particularly he and Patrick Stewart work so well together. And I think on a previous episode of the podcast, maybe on Encounter at Farpoint, I think it might have been Dan who mentioned just the idea that you're this guest star and you've got to act across from Patrick fucking Stewart, who is so fucking great. And there's so many great actors on this show, but Patrick Stewart is of course this high level actor.
Dear old Patty Stewart.
And John Delancey can come and stand toe to toe and you believe it. Yeah. You believe that he can have power over Patrick Stewart, and it's not merely a function of the magic powers he's given by the writers. It's something he exudes in his attitude and in how he presents himself. The playfulness and the sinisterness that entangle with each other in such a fun, clever way. It's unsurprising that this character was so beloved and became so successful. It's also unsurprising that, depending on which perspective you have, it's a character that they may have gone to the well too often. I don't think in The Next Generation, but I do think, they tried him out on Deep Space Nine and it's okay. And then in Voyager, there's some multiple examples in Voyager, which are not bad stories, but it's that sort of thing where like you start learning too much about a character and it in some ways lessens it, because if the character's strength is in some part based on the mysteries behind that character, you lose some of that mystery and it loses some of the strength of the character.
So I was thinking at first that I might like if you're going to compare, when you talked about the going to the well too much with Q. Now you compare that. At first I was thinking, well, I'd prefer that to a holodeck kind of go to that well, any day. But then I was thinking like, what's the one where Worf goes, "I am not a merry man"? That's the one where...
That's with Q, yeah.
Cupid, yeah.
Cupid, yeah.
Yeah, so
Which a lot of people don't like that episode.
See, and I was like, I remember not liking that, and I'm willing to watch it again, but I seem to just I remember being like, ugh. But there were a lot of Q episodes that I really liked, and I always just have this memory of holodeck episodes being really obnoxious, but it's been a while since I've seen both.
The best part is when Worf says, "I am not a merry man."
Yeah,
that's like the best part.
No, the best.
When Geordi's
associated with that, because Geordi's trying to play the lute and he's playing all shitty, and Worf just takes it and smashes it.
It's so great because he's playing
he's
so
like, sorry.
And then it's so great because he's playing it so shitty, but Geordi's still just like looking all wistful, just like he's really into it, but he's playing such
shit. He's giving it a try.
Yeah, good for him, man.
Hey, good for him for being. That's fucking true. Get out there. You all out there in the audience. You all have creativity and you do something. A lot of you already are, but like if you aren't, just don't worry about it. Just take that extra step. Get out on there and
what are you worried about?
What are you worried about?
What are you worried
Don't even worry about it. Real
Come on, stop being worried.
My hair grows. By the way, something. What do you care? That's another Larry King joke. You can look it up.
So speaking of A Good Place, I remember there was a line I think that John Delancey Q was calling Data a robot. And Data goes, "I'm an android, not a robot." And isn't that something like Janet was always saying, like, not a woman, not a girl.
Not a girl. Yeah.
And she was also saying not a robot, too, I think, from time to time.
because she's not a robot.
I don't think there's any relation between those two things, but it immediately brought that into my head. And I think that I found that to be interesting when I thought about it. Because Good Place is a really good show.
It is a really good show.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
You should check it out, Jesse.
I should.
Then we'll do a podcast called "It's Got the Good Place."
Oh, and when Q first gets attacked by those Zaldanian swirly goos.
1, 2, Calamarain.
Yeah, those guys.
Second Shap.
And then, oh man, and then I think it's in 10 forward, and Q falls on the ground, and it's kind of disturbing because he starts yelling, "Help me! Somebody help me!" And it's like, oh man, that's a real bummer.
Because like how much you wonder like how much suffering is he could have just been having like a little bit of suffering, and he just thinks that's the worst thing ever because he's never suffered before.
Out of context,
right?
He couldn't even handle being hungry.
Because they were like, we're getting probed. It's like a soft medical probe.
Soft medical probe. Yeah,
he could have just been like, these guys are like they could have just been tickling him or something. He'd be like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, fuck getting tickled. Fuck that shit.
To each their own, Dan.
It's weird what you're doing right now.
Yeah, tickling's not good.
Geordi thinks he is in command here, and he is correct.
Yeah.
That was good. Data was shutting Q down, being like, "I strongly suggest you stand down."
And I think Data outranks Geordi.
No, well, Geordi is chief engineer, and I think Data's
like operations.
He's a lieutenant commander at this stage. I think. You think he's still?
I think they're the same rank at this point, but I think Data's still senior.
Well, don't doctors get to control their medical bay or whatever, and not even a captain can mess with them?
Well, that's the doctor.
But I'm saying, does that apply to? Does that apply to?
Them, yeah.
No, Dan's I think on the right track.
Yeah, well, does that apply the same to engineering?
Location.
Where if you're in engineering, Geordi is
right. He was in command in that particular task.
Yeah, because like Data is second in command. He's after Riker. I think I think already at this stage he's lieutenant commander. Geordi is a lieutenant commander at this stage. I was looking at the pips. I was like,
they're the same.
I was like looking deep into the pips.
But Geordi he started out as a lieutenant.
Yeah, well, he started out as a navigator with a red shirt for some reason.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
they had another. Yeah, in season 1 they had this whole other chief engineer.
Yeah.
They had some like
that other guy.
He was like Irish or something. Yeah. They were like, oh, he won't be Scottish. We'll just get a pasty Irish guy with a beard. He was a nice guy. It didn't, And
O'Brien was like the con.
Yeah,
they called him con.
Yeah, and O'Brien was this is a side thing, but like O'Brien was weirdly like in the first season he was like a commissioned officer, but then like they quickly changed into a non-commissioned officer.
That's right.
And then that's what he stayed.
He was
the
on
rest
the bridge.
Of his thing. Yeah.
Q was like being all skeptical to Geordi about the Enterprise and what it can do, and Geordi's all, "You don't know what this shield can do, mister."
What the ship can do?
Because Q was being all like, Geordi was talking about this plan, and Q was like, it's never gonna have enough power. Everything's gonna die, and you're gonna die, and we're all gonna die. It's not the first time I'm not talking about the first time where Q tells him to change the gravitational constant. I'm talking about later. Geordi's trying to pump things up, and Q is all because he had a hard time listening to orders, so he's like a spoiled child that thinks he should be handed things because he's so smart or whatever. But that's when Data told him to sit down because Geordi was getting pissed, and then so Q was being all pouty and saying like, well, he's just not going to do it. Everything is be stupid. You're stupid. And then instead of getting mad, Geordi was just like, you don't know what this ship can do, mister. You don't know what the ship can do, mister.
Mister, like Dr. Girardi is always saying mister to Picard.
I thought it was a weird thing to say. It's like mister. It's like, this ship can't do it. You don't know what this ship can do,
well, mister.
Mister
is also the term you'd use for a lower ranked or a non-commissioned officer.
I just thought of it more like old school, like, golly gee, mister. That's what how I was like, thinking of it. And so that's my opinion on it.
Geordi should have been entitled to using much harsher language as the chief engineer.
I know, but he's a nice guy.
Son of a bitch,
it's like
he was on Reading Rainbow.
I'm trying to get this fucking warp drive into fucking gear, motherfucker.
Listen, Buster Brown.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with all of that.
The fucking dilithium is going off the rails, motherfuckers.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry.
Geordi is very nice for a chief engineer because Scotty was they censored out the cursing of Scotty. Scotty was
I bet.
Scotty was at a foul mouth.
Of course he did.
Except half the time he wouldn't be able to understand it. I think the other thing to mention before we get to our odds and ends is just a couple things about just the production stuff, right? So a couple of maybe interesting facts. First of all, it was written by a fellow named Richard Danis.
They named a planet after him in Discovery.
Or Danis, did they?
Yeah, Danis 5.
So this guy wrote only a few episodes of Star Trek. He wrote a couple of episodes of TNG. He did Booby Trap and this one, Deja Q. And he did a couple of Deep Space Nine, Battle Lines, and the Sword of Kallus. But those are all, I mean, they're pretty good episodes. There's a couple, like Sword of Kallus is good. Deja Q is probably the most classic episode. This is a really well-written episode. It was directed by Les Landau. And Les Landau is a name you will recognize because he directed a shitload of fucking Silver Age Trek. Mostly TNG. He directed a ton of TNG episodes, but he also directed Deep Space Nine, Voyager, a number of episodes there. He directed one episode of Enterprise. But in TNG, he directed a lot of classics. He directed Clues, Night Terrors, Unification. I forget, maybe the second Unification. He did both Time Zero episodes. He did Chain of Command Part 2, which is the whole, like, there are 4 lights episode, right? And he did Tapestry.
Samaritan Snare.
Yeah, he did Samaritan Snare, which is that's a great episode. Tapestry I mentioned that because that's a classic Q episode. And Tapestry Tapestry comes later. And one question we have about this episode is Q is this godlike creature. He's humiliated basically by his own people, brought low to experience being mortal, being trapped within a mortal body without his powers. And he appears sincerely to learn some lessons through the experience. He learns the lessons of sacrifice from Data, right? That's a key thing. You know, we talked a little bit before about the whole trolley problem and the philosophical question about whether or not to give up Q to the Calamarain or not. But it is an interesting question, but they don't answer it. They don't have to answer it because Q sort of solves that for them. Secondly, it comes late in the episode, and it's just not a big part of the episode. A bigger part of the episode is Q witnessing Data potentially sacrifice his own health and safety and even life to save Q. And that affects Q in a certain way. And other interactions he has with Data affect Q. It's really primarily his interactions with Data that seem to have influenced him, right, on this episode. And the question then is do we see this later? And I would argue, I do think we see some hints of this later.
In other episodes?
In other Q episodes subsequent to this. And I think Tapestry is the key one, because if you recall, in Tapestry, basically Picard dies on the operating table for all intents and purposes and encounters Q in the quote-unquote afterlife, and then Q sort of gives him an opportunity to change the direction of his life and, you know, teaches Picard a few moral lessons. I'm sure we'll discuss that episode at some point in the future.
We should.
But the question, and it's not, I don't think it's spoilery, and who cares? It's an old show. At the end of that episode,
if you haven't seen it, it's your fault.
Picard wonders I think he's talking to Troy, and he's wondering, he's really curious. He's like, did this really helped me? And did Q do this to help me? And he's sort of confused because he's like, you know, he's not used to that. And the Vash thing with Q, the whole Cupid, that happens in the intervening time. That's a little bit more on the old school Q dickishness. But Tapestry seems to flow from this episode very clearly, because it's sort of like Q was helped in this episode. He grew a little bit. And then he's now returning the favor to Picard, even though he actually grew from Data.
Yeah, this whole a lot of this episode was Q sort of, you know, from first experiencing the physical things like, you know...
Physical.
Like, you know, male pattern baldness and sleep and things like that. And
Hunger.
So that's like a...
Chronic masturbation.
So that's like a personal realization he was having. And everyone's getting pissed at him because there's all this terrible shit going on, and all Q can think about is his own journey. Well, he can be a little forgiven because he's experiencing all this shit new, but also he is Q, so he doesn't really know how to table that stuff. But then, you know, later with Picard, there's that scene where he puts his butt on Picard's ready room desk. Yeah. You know, and he's all talking to him. He's like putting his butt on there. I'm surprised Picard didn't give a look there because, you know, I don't want some...
I'm surprised they didn't have a joke about Q farting and being surprised by it. You know, like when you have a puppy. Right, yeah. Sometimes you have a puppy and the puppy that farts for the first time and it freaks out and it like runs away from its own fart. I think that would have been a funny visual gag to have John Delancey running away from his own fart.
What happened?
So, and during that whole conversation with Picard, Picard's basically worried about all this important shit, and Q's having all these personal realizations and talking about how he's like a worthless human being, and he's coming through all this important stuff that's, you know, that's sort of taken lightly by everyone because it's Q. But that is sort of like his personal journey to sort of growing in this episode, like you said, Patrick, how sort of it worked towards Tapestry. And, you know, at one point Picard's like, that's funny. He says, I'm not your father confessor, which I guess,
father confessor,
which is a funny, which I guess is a real term. Obviously it's a real term, but yeah, it's just what is it? Father is a priest, same thing.
Yeah, I think that's what
it's just. I'd never heard that referred to.
Yeah,
that before.
you go confess in the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
and in some of the stricter areas that, you know, in the Anglican Church.
No, I
learned this from Midsummer Murders.
Yeah. Okay, so I
learned something from Midsummer Murders, which is that the Anglican Church actually can allow for confession. A lot of them don't, because they associate it with Catholicism, but technically it is included within the Anglican rites, and some Anglican churches do both practice and allow for confession.
That's cool. So I was aware that there was this thing where people confessed in this box. It's only like a trope in every show and every movie. So I just never heard of it referred to as a father confessor. But I didn't, the Anglican thing, no, I didn't know that. So that is fresh. That's fresh.
Knowing is half the battle.
That's what
when you're
some
battling
people think.
The Anglican Church.
So anyways, it was...
in the United States referred to as the Episcopalian Church, although there has recently been a schism.
So it was basically the course of the episode is he's realizing all these new physical things about himself, these personal existential realizations, and then he sacrifices himself at the end, which seems really selfish that he's doing this. All he can do is think about himself when all these thousands of people are going to die. And that's how everyone in the crew kind of treats him, as being selfish for thinking about these things. But in the end, that's what kind of saved him. And it changed him to to later episodes, like you were saying, to have a little bit more sort of,
a wee bit more, just a wee bit more compassion for the human race.
What? Why?
A wee bit more.
Why?
Why?
Just die.
All right. So I'm aggravating Dan, so we should move along to the odds and ends section.
And ends.
I had a quick one, a couple here, but one of them was that season 3, I believe, is when they started with the full orchestra, right? The full orchestration. I think they primarily relied on synths before that. I'm sure they had orchestration as well. But
the TOS had full orchestra.
Yeah, TOS did, but in TNG, you got to remember production styles changed. And
I know, but I don't remember TNG.
Early TNG is all synth.
Like during the episode.
Yeah, what'd you think? I
thought you meant like the opening credits.
No. Yeah. The episode is all early TNG is all like meow meow meow. But season 3, I think they got a full dedicated orchestra. They probably had it before that.
There's more instruments, but there's also more synth noises that are just more like elaborate.
And and I was going to say they were because later in TNG they move away from most of that synth stuff and it's pure orchestral type music, but in season 3 they've still got that, and this episode has a lot of that where there's some good orchestra stuff and then there's just some
there's all kinds of funny twinkly noises.
I refer to it as squingles and squangles.
You even hear it in the opening music before the music starts going when it's just like the stars. There's some extra star twinkling noise.
There is a little bit
when Q is getting wrapped up by the calamarain in engineering and Data's like And Data's like going after him. He looks like he's about to try to catch a bunch of chickens. You watch that scene, his hands are all like I'm about to catch these chickens. Like in every movie where they kind of squat a little and they have their arms out like a wrestling stance or something. And so he was going to catch Q like a chicken and looked humorous. Just have, Data. What? He would have a little bit better sort of understanding of how to control his body than that.
Berthold rays. They mentioned Berthold rays. And those were mentioned on the TOS episode This Side of Paradise.
Butthole rays.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I know it did sound like butthole rays.
When they were talking about sensors showing broadband emissions, including Berthold rays and blah, 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 75 REMs, soft medical scan, blah, blah, blah. I don't remember if they said sensor or sensors. I figured it would have stuck out to me if they said sensor.
TNG was more about the sensors than the sensor.
Wait, who was more about the sensors?
Spock.
I swear Data would say sensor.
He might.
Sometimes he did, actually.
I'll have to go back and check.
I think you're right on that one, but everybody else said sensors.
I think that...
Picard may have said something a little bit more like that because he's British, but I didn't say sensors.
He's French. Picard is French, technically.
Well, yes.
There was a whole...
nobody believes that.
I forget if it was on Reddit or Twitter or what, but there was a whole thing where people were saying, like, why doesn't Picard say lieutenant? And somebody was like, well, he's French, so it makes sense that he says lieutenant.
It comes from French, too, I think.
Yeah, because lieutenant is French. Lieutenant is the British way to say it.
Yeah.
So, but he's a British actor, but he's playing a French guy, and that's why he would say lieutenant.
Maybe it's like in the future where, for example, Starship Troopers, they were a bunch of white people living in Brazil or something.
Doc, you built a starship out of a DeLorean.
No, I was talking about Starship Troopers, not Back to the Future.
Argentina.
Mr. Fusion.
And so it's like in the future, there's this idea that all these people are relocated and accents are moved around. So that's what.
And you take showers, and there's
white people
gender.
took over.
So
basically, Starship Troopers was mostly white people.
And
white people took over.
And
white people and bugs.
So are we supposed to assume that Picard was, it's just a result of the future having people's accents and stuff move around the world, or is it just kind of like they just didn't think about it? I'm guessing they just didn't think about it, which is weird. Why not just make them British to begin with?
The idea, I think, like everybody's speaking English because that's the common tongue.
No, I'm not talking about.
They learned it from a book.
No, I'm not talking about.
Y'all really got to watch Fawlty Towers if you haven't seen Fawlty Towers.
If I was gonna get on Star Trek's case for speaking English, everybody speaks English, and then the universal translator. My point is, why does Picard? And this is what we just mentioned. This is what everybody wonders. This is what Patrick was just talking about. Is why, of course.
But if he's from Europe, then the Europeans all have the British style English, so he's got a British accent.
But they didn't predict Brexit. They did predict the unification of Ireland, and there's that episode where they didn't show it in Ireland until like the 2000s or something, because it said in 2024 there was a unified Ireland.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about, though, how in the future you have people relocating, and so their accents sort of move around the world, and that makes sense what you're saying. So I was suggesting, like, is that what we're to assume, or is it just something the writers didn't think about?
I think it's complicated. I know what you're getting at, Dan, and it's complicated by the fact that Picard tends to look the best when he's dressed, when he's walking around like Victorian England on a holodeck dressed in a top hat, not when he's walking around a vineyard in France where he seems completely out of place with his pit bull.
It's like,
we're like, what are you guys doing here?
Patrick Stewart's going to be Patrick Stewart. I think
it doesn't take anything away from the show at all.
No.
It takes nothing away from the show.
It's just some fun flavors.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of fun flavors up in the background there.
When Q gets his powers back, he immediately starts fucking with the camera.
I know. He's like, fuck you.
And he's like, oh, I was just testing you. I was just seeing if you're watching this. No, he wasn't. He's totally fucking with me.
And we should mention, of course, that second Q,
Corbin Burnson.
Corbin Burnson, colloquially known as Q2.
I think he was having some male pattern baldness going too.
Yes, yeah, you're really paying a lot of attention to this. And by the way, audience, for those who are not aware, Dan has not only a full head of hair, he is just lush, beautiful hair. Now, to be fair, this is true of all three of us.
All of us have a lot of hair.
All of us have dealt in our lives, and increasingly so as we've aged, with that terrible and unfortunate, and I frankly think uncalled for bitterness from colleagues and friends and family.
All those guys
who look at our long, flowing, beautiful locks with frustration. I don't state this as a means of bragging, merely to provide context for this interesting one episode thus far obsession Dan has had with the potential balding of these actors.
I mean, so what you said, yeah, I know it's a little weird because he was just talking about cues. He's like just talking about how something has to deal with male pattern baldness or whatever. But I think the thing is though is I have other horrific things about my body, so it's not like I come out. It's not like I'm coming out on top here. It's just one thing.
But you know what's coming out on top? The beautiful hair growing out of the top of Dan's head.
Like a hibiscus.
Like you put your fingers in there and they get stuck.
I must clarify for those who think that this is some sort of comedy gag or riff. In part it is, but we are being completely sincere. All three of us have really, really nice hair. Yeah. And Dan is correct. There are many other things about us.
I have the best, actually.
Jesse has the best by far, but there are many other things about us that are upsetting, unfortunate, unhealthy. In some cases, potentially disgusting, depending on your subjective perspective.
Possibly life-threatening,
but not the hair. The hair is good to go.
Good to go. So I just.
But Corbin Burnson, Corbin Burnson was his hair was thinning, and the funny thing is this was at the beginning of his career, right? He did.
Yeah, he was doing L.A. Law.
Yeah, he was doing L.A. Law. He was in Major League, so he was a known quantity. He's weirdly uncredited in this episode. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure why. I'm guessing maybe they just grabbed him. Maybe he was filming on the studio next door or something, and they just grabbed him and had him do it. But we talked about how the scene with Guinan, as short as it is, it stands out really clear in my memory. Ever since I first saw this episode when it aired in 1990, I remember the Guinan stabbing Q with a fork scene. And the other thing that is burned into my memory is Corbin Burnson sticking his head through the bulkhead.
Yeah.
That was
shuttle.
really great. I really liked that.
That just is in my brain.
Yeah. It worked out well. It looked cool. It could have looked really shitty, and it didn't at all.
Yeah.
Or when he pops into the shuttlecraft, and Q is all like, Q, and he's all like, yeah. And he's like,
he's being all jive.
But he also keeps like looking at his hands, like, what the fuck are these things?
He's gesturing with his hands, but then he like looks at his hands. He's like, what?
Because it's easy to forget. Like, it's kind of a reminder that John Delancey Q is the one who's all obsessed with humans, but like the other Qs don't necessarily give a shit. Like,
And I also like that he, like Q, he's like this fucking man, this outfit sucks.
Yeah, right.
This is a fucking shitty ass late 80s outfit. This is the 90s. Shouldn't it be like in living color style, like super colorful patterns?
Cross colors.
Like Jake Sisko patterns? We're not there yet? Come on. It's only a couple years away from Jake Sisko patterns.
Yeah.
Jake Sisko patterns.
Yeah.
He did have some patterns, didn't he?
Oh, he had some patterns.
So when Data was all, doing the laugh thing, he looked at first like he was gagging on a hairball at first. So it seemed like he was dry heaving or something.
We did that.
But then
Brent Spiner.
Yeah, no, it's not a criticism.
Classically trained actor.
No, I'm not. Yeah, and it's not a criticism. It was just kind of funny. But then he did the laughter, and it's a great scene. It's a
wonderful scene.
It's a nice moment.
And then it weirdly I tear up a little bit at that scene. Like halfway through his laugh is when I'm kind of like I get a little emotionally like involved.
Yeah, and it's a great scene. And this is not a comment on the writers. This is a comment directly on Geordi. This is Geordi's fault. Geordi's kind of ruining the moment because Data's laughing, and he's like, Data, why are you laughing? And it's like, just let him have it. Because Riker and Picard, and Troy, they knew to let Data have his moment.
Right, yeah.
And it's like, how do you fully enjoy that when someone's barking in your ear? They should have let him, Q should have waited till he got to his room and then just like for 10 minutes laugh. And then he would have gotten his full enjoyment from it. But that was just like a tease with Geordi kind of
And you could have seen
it.
like Spot, like looking at him like, why is this guy laughing like this?
Meow. But it is a good scene. It works better than I guess a lot of the emotional scenes in Generations, because it's sort of like it's tastefully done and reserved. So I think it's and the fact that it is so short, it makes it nicer too. It's just a fleeting moment. It makes it better. I kid, but
I like I like two things. First of all, I like the scene when the scientist lady, from the planet is all like, was like, we're all gonna fucking get fucked up here.
Yeah.
And the other person is all like, dude, chill out.
Yeah.
We know you're doing your best.
And I'm glad they did that because when she started doing that, I was like, that's kind of rude.
I thought that too.
And then so I'm glad they actually had the character because they could have just moved on. I'm glad the character was like,
well thought out because that felt realistic.
Yeah,
it felt like somebody freaking out and then somebody else being like, look, they're doing what they can. We gotta chill out.
Because it's frustrating when somebody says that and they just kind of move it on to like move this just to keep the scene moving. But it's like, wait a minute, this is leaving me with all these things I want to say to this person in real life. Like they're trying their best, man. So it's nice that the character gets to do it for me. And you ever see, those TV shows where the kid gets in trouble because he doesn't like say, well, that guy did this. You know what I mean? Like, the kid gets in trouble with the teacher and it's because like for some stupid thing where all the kid had to do was say, oh, I was late because, I fell out of a tree or something. And instead it's like the kid will fall out of a tree and then get to school and the principal will be like, that's detention.
Right.
But the kid never goes, I just fell out of a fucking tree.
I think that's more a function of schools used to be like even shittier than they are today. I think schools used to be a bad place to go.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Don't go to school, kids.
There was some point where Picard was like, hail the Brielle, and they were like, oh, they're already standing by. And it's like, well, yeah, like of course they're standing by. Like you're there they're waiting for like news that you're going to fucking save them.
Yeah, it's like there's nothing they can do. They've done what they can do. They put people in the caves or whatever.
They're desperate.
I really liked at the end because it's fun when you're watching something and on the basic level you're watching a TV show. It's meant for entertainment and you enjoy the plot and you enjoy the characters and all that other stuff. But especially when you've watched it multiple times or you've gotten more interested in story structure and things like that, then you start to see the perspective of the writers, the perspective of the producers. And you see that really clearly in this episode when this is a Q episode and the plot with the planet is meant as a driver for that storyline of the Q storyline. The Q storyline is the focus. And you get that no more clearly than when the scientists ring up at the end because presumably Q or the Q continuum, somebody's fixed the moon and put it back into orbit. And the scientists is called up and Picard is basically like, oh shit, we totally forgot about you people. Picard's like, wait, what? Moon? What? Oh yeah. Because we were all focused on this whole like Q thing and the Calamarain and you're like, we totally, because there's a chunk at the end of the episode where the planet storyline is completely forgotten.
Yeah.
And it's almost surprising when it comes back.
Hit with a field of energetic tachyons.
Yeah, tachyons. They were throwing those tachyons. They were fucking them up.
Energetic tachyons.
Wow. Those tachyons can do everything, good and bad. Yeah. So I
It
guess
was tagging on City up in that mode.
so it was just kind of like a way to keep things moving, I guess, just that whole thing, because it did feel like such like a non-threat. The stakes are huge, but you never felt threatened by them for some reason.
Okay, and so the last thing I wanted to mention personally was I was thinking about, especially towards the end of this episode.
Personally, you want to mention it? Just personally?
I'm just personally.
As a group, I think you should say it.
I'm now introducing it to the group.
Okay.
It starts out as a personal.
Starts out as personal.
I don't want to make this personal.
Personal.
Personal is a warm voice.
Are you talking to me?
Warm voice.
Yeah, you got a warm
I'm a
voice.
squishy
I'm
worm.
gonna tell you something.
I'm a squishy worm in your squishy place. I'm a squishy worm in your moist squishy place.
Yes. Okay, so we're gonna end the
Squishy,
podcast
moist
soon
place.
because Dan is hitting all my buttons. All the good buttons.
He's added up to here.
No, all the good buttons. I'm digging the squishy worm. He's talking about squishy worms, squishy floppy worms, and sticking them places.
Put them in my squishy moist
It's
place.
exciting.
It means
After-
things have to end before it gets out.
When
of
we
hand.
finish the podcast, we either play a round of Magic the Gathering, or we do maybe do a different kind of gathering, if you know what I mean.
Use your imagination. So you were saying
It's a
something.
different sort of magic.
Yeah. So you were saying something personal that you wanted to say about the episode.
I wanted to comment on what modern internet trolls would be if this episode was brand new. This episode, which is a by and large considered one of the classic episodes, maybe not top 10,
Definitely classic.
but definitely a classic episode.
It's a really good introduction to It's one of those episodes
It was
that's a really
top
good
100
And
episode.
even people who don't like it would admit that this is an episode they know about, they remember. But imagine what the modern internet dolts would have to say about Q just sort of walking to the shuttle bay, taking a shuttle.
An unscheduled shuttle.
And like, where are the security measures? Where are the guards? Why didn't they blow him out of the sky? Because in a military situation, it's just a reminder that time soothes all plot contrivances, right?
Yeah.
The things that people, when you watch in Discovery or Picard or whatever, and people are like, this is crazy. It would not work this way. You're taking it a little too seriously, folks. The TNG did this, Deep Space Nine, TOS. These are TV shows. The plot is important. You gotta get to the plot.
The Capitol Police would totally stop any invaders. That's what their job is.
Very good point.
They wouldn't let anybody get into the.
Very good point. A salient and cogent and contemporary point.
Contemporaneous?
Contemporaneous. No, in this case, it would be contemporary. It's a contemporary point. Contemporaneous would be if the point was contemporaneous with the associated thing.
Oh, I see what you're
It's a
saying.
contemporary point.
That's like contemporaneous is more like math.
Yeah, exactly. You got
Like the cumulative property.
like cumulonimbus clouds.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other odds and ends from your ends? Otherwise,
I
think that was that's all my ends.
all right. I will say I am personally disappointed in myself because I had two notes here related to Dan. First, I had a note here saying Dan will mention Q sighing and saying 217. You remember that scene when he's like working for Geordi? And Geordi is all like what? I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like he was asking for a data point from Q.
Oh,
and Q was just like, and he pushes the button. He's like 217.
Yeah. No, see, that's a good point.
I'm not disappointed in you. I'm disappointed in me.
Wait, what? Why is that? How are you blaming yourself for this one?
I'm not blaming it's not blame. This is a comedy podcast. I'm not really.
Well, you know what I'm saying. Like you're saying, you're disappointed in yourself.
I really thought you would mention that. The other thing I thought you would mention is when
comedy podcast.
Is when I said Dan will mention when Corbin Burnson is like, fine, you got your powers back.
Oh yeah, I don't know why.
Those
I
were
would
things
mention.
that stuck out to me that I thought you might mention.
Yeah. So you're saying you're disappointed in yourself because you inaccurately sort of predicted my behavior?
Or
you're disappointed. You're partly disappointed in me for not bringing him up.
I'm not. No. Yes, but no. Because it's more complicated than that. Because what I'm disappointed in is that I got so excited for the excitement I would have felt when, in the natural course of our conversation tonight, you would have been like, "Oh, in that part where he's like, oh, you got your powers back." And I would have been like, aha! I made a note about it, and then we would all laugh at how our long friendship, our long friendship gives us a certain simpatico, a certain mental connection where we like feed off of each other, and that didn't happen in this particular case. So it's mostly disappointment, not in me, not in you, just sort of in the structure of the universe.
Not today, mister.
Not today.
The one that was a good line when he goes, you got your powers back. But the one about the 217, I don't know why I didn't bring that one up. Maybe the number was too easy. Maybe it was just because it was one number spoken out loud that I was like, oh, anyone will remember that. Yeah. But if it's like a passing shot of the screen and you pause it and you see all these like complicated numbers,
like blurred numbers that you use some sort of AI to help clean up.
Yeah, right.
You upscale it to 4K so you can read the digits.
I did say the star date though, which was 43539.1. But yeah, that's a good point.
What are you gonna do?
What you gonna do?
That's what they say. All right. If there's nothing else, I think that'll do it for us regarding this episode. I think did we agree that next week we'll do the Way of the Warrior?
Way of the Warrior.
2-parter, Deep Space Nine, Season 4, Way of the Warrior. So that's your homework for next week. We got a little bit of Worf, some classic small Worf bits, but he wasn't a main character in this episode. But next week, oh my God, if you like your Worf, you're going to love this Deep Space Nine Worf.
It's a Worfy.
Worfy.
It's
Worful.
Don't cry Worf.
Yeah. Don't be
We're not crying Worf.
We're not crying. We're not the boy who cried Worf. So that's what we will be getting into next week. And in the meantime, you should definitely follow us on social media. Social media.
Social meds.
Social media.
Yeah, you guys put together interesting little visual bits
on social media
people can check out.
We put up all sorts of graphics and stuff in there.
Shit.
Promos. We interact with people.
You guys work really hard on that stuff. You should look at that stuff.
Have you? Well, thank you. We all work together as a great team.
Yeah, we should get Jesse on Twitter. Jesse would be the most interesting person if he was on Twitter, but he's not currently on Twitter.
Yeah,
I should do that.
I was trying to push the social meds things, but everyone just completely ignored me, which is fine.
Didn't we repeat it after you?
You said social. You said social media.
Okay, social.
I was really trying to do. Now I just have to point out the fact that I was trying to push it. Because
are we still in a position to coin new phrases, or is that something for the youth to take on? I'm not taking a position on that, by the way. I'm just curious.
That's an interesting question.
It is a good question.
It might be that we have to rely on the youth.
I think we can coin words for ourselves to use, and we shouldn't assume that other people are going to use it.
Well, that's a fair point.
The newest thing is people go, imagine being that stupid, or imagine thinking that it was cool to do A, B, and C. Imagine blah, blah, blah. As in, when you say imagine this, it's saying like, imagine being so dumb. It's basically saying imagine being so ridiculously out of hand with society and the world and your own intelligence that like it's impossible that they would think. You know what I'm saying?
Do people say amazeballs?
No, they don't say amazeballs. What they say is somebody will be
somebody does. Come on.
Somebody will be like, I have a controversial opinion, and here's a controversial opinion, and then the person responds with, who's like sort of chiding that person or making fun of that person, says, imagine thinking that controversial thing.
Do you think that's a subtle product placement for Imagine Entertainment, Ron Howard's production company?
I keep thinking Imagine...
That guy's a sneaky motherfucker, so I bet.
I keep thinking Imagine Dragons, and I don't even like that band.
I saw Imagine Dragons at a Washington Post like political event.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was an anti-opiate thing.
I have nothing against them, but the only songs
they were dressed all goofy. It was just hilarious because there were some senators and like doctors on the panel, and then Imagine Dragons showed up. That
is weird.
Yeah,
I like dragons and I like to imagine things. So
yeah,
but I don't like Imagine Dragons.
Yeah, I don't really have anything against them, but I haven't heard a song that I enjoyed from them. So.
Oh, there you go. All right. So now we talked about social media, but we did not, in fact, describe how to get there. Dan, would you have any recommendations for how people would find us on social medias?
It's Got Star Trek It's Got Star Trek on Twitter and Instagram, and if you want on Facebook, but you can just say It's Got Star Trek on Facebook, and then you can say feedback at itsgotstartrek.com if you want to email us.
You say that out loud and then an email will happen?
Yeah.
I think, can't you get Alexa to do that shit?
Or Google.
Or Google. Feedback.
Feedback.
I'm sorry. I don't know what that means. I've never heard of It's Got Star Trek.
Feedback.
You're stupid.
Yeah, at It's Got Star Trek on social media. Feedback at It's Got Star Trek. It's Got StarTrek.com. Throw a couple of throw 3 W's ahead of that if you like.
And if
you don't have to.
And if you want to be excessive, you can put the HTTPS.
colon.
You should.
Backslash.
There's a few of them in there.
There's enough.
Yeah, the website's cool. I mean, yeah, subscribe to us in your podcast player. You can get us on YouTube. People love the YouTube because nothing's better than listening to a podcast while watching a static image.
Yeah,
because
it's like watching a YouTube music video.
Yeah, we're not videotaping this. Put it on while you're vacuuming, or if you're in England, hoovering. Because that's the term they use in England. So if you're in England right now and you're watching Midsummer Murders and you're hoovering.
Hoover means something different in America.
Put in, it
means cross-dressing Nazis.
Look up the J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI.
I didn't know that's what it meant, Jesse.
Yeah. That's apparently what it means, according to Jesse. Jesse's older than us. He knows about these things. Where Dan and I are very young, and we don't know these things. But Jesse's our elder.
You're like 2 years younger than me.
Anyway, feedback at itsgotstartrek.com and at It's Got Star Trek. I think we got most of these things. Next week, Way of the Warrior. It's a 2-parter, so when you're doing your homework, you plan accordingly because it's a 2-parter. That means 2 times 42 minutes.
It'll be a 4-hour podcast.
Hey, and give us a review sometime if you want. It really helps us out.
Oh, yeah. You can do that whole rate and review and subscribes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they listen to the Apple ones, the Apple
reviews. I don't know.
But no, I will never.
It is.
I will never ask anyone to put themselves through the whole iTunes thing if they don't want to do it. If you like iTunes, great for you. But I understand a lot of people don't like the way it operates.
Good
so
for
I'm
you.
not going to make you do
Good
that.
for you. These guys, they like the iTunes.
People have a problem with Apple.
Yeah, Apple's good. It's fine.
It's whatever.
It's fine. If you're in that ecosystem, go for it.
No, but I mean, the common complaint of iTunes is it's bloated and obnoxious, and it's just you have to be in their ecosystem to do all the shit, but it makes it just kind of slightly more irritating for me. And I'm nothing against Apple because I think Apple makes great products. I just don't like that their whole system.
He just doesn't have any of them.
I just
I've got some iTunes.
The music system.
I have to say, I just don't listen to it that much.
All right, we'll discuss more on next week's episode of It's Got Computers. It's got competing computer environments.
Jesse's got an iPhone.
I actually have an iPad, so.
All right, good for you.
So
so I'm just saying, like you said, I didn't have one, and I wanted to clarify.
Okay, no, that's fair. You should clarify that. Yeah. I think that was important for you to do that.
Now he's talking down to me.
I'm not talking down to you. I sincerely think
everybody, Dan's got an iPad. We
all got to understand. We've got Jesse's in the iPhone ecosystem. Dan's in a mixed ecosystem.
I'm in no ecosystem. It's just one thing.
He's got an iPad. Now, how often do you use the iPad?
I use it a bunch.
Read books.
Do you really? What do you use it for?
Look, I'm not going to tell you my daily activities. I don't know why you have to sort of...
Don't dox him, dude.
You're just
don't task me.
Don't task me.
Don't task me, bro.
I use it for stuff like surfing the web and stuff, you know?
Sometimes you want a bigger screen.
So when Dan needs to get on the information superhighway, when he needs to get on the internet with a capital I, he logs into his Apple iPad.
Sometimes, because it's easier that way. Sometimes I also have
I think that's great.
I also have music writing software, like notation software on it. That's pretty neat.
I think that's wonderful.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's great. Well, okay.
I don't use it as much as I should.
Okay. We'll hear more about.
We'll do a bonus episode about.
You had to give me the Inquisition on what I do. You're trying to prove something. I don't know.
There's a special podcast about Dan's devices.
Yeah, maybe we'll do we should do that. People have been asking. They want to learn more personal
questions. What are you guys doing over there?
People email us all the time, and sometimes they're asking. They're like, "Oh, what kind of production equipment do you use? Or what's your background? What's your background with Star Trek? How did you come to Star Trek?" And other people are like, give us some physical dimensions.
Give us some chips.
Certain body parts, or what's your favorite cheese?
What are you guys wearing?
I don't have a favorite
that's a
cheese,
common one.
but if I had an all-around cheese, just a good old super sharp cheddar, it will always do me fine. But I love all sorts of crazy.
Aged or, I mean, sharp cheddar tends to be aged. So.
Do you guys
just
get
like-
really sweaty when you do the podcast? Is it?
But
Yeah.
I like your strong Stiltons and things like that too. So
Stilton, Camembert,
yeah.
Gruyere, Paul Nevec, Porcelou.
Sweaty. I don't get sweaty at all.
Porcelou
here.
is pretty good.
It's cold as balls.
You know, I like
Turns
a
off the
good
heat.
Swiss. But anyway, so we'll get into that more next week. In the meantime,
Bunch of stuff to get into next week.
Go live your lives. Go live your lives and have a good one.
Go get
and
your shine box.
Get,
See what happens.
get your fucking shine box. And we will talk to you
A little bit.
next week.
A little bit.
Bye-bye.
If I were to ask you a very simple question, do you think you might be able to answer it without it troubling your intellect too much? Ready? Here goes. Would I permit you to lock me away if I still had all my powers?
You have fooled us too often, Q.
Oh, perspicacity incarnate. Please don't feel compelled now to tell me the story of the boy who cried Worf.